The wind whispered through the ancient stones of the castle, carrying with it the scent of rain and decay. The Duke's castle had stood for centuries, perched atop a jagged hill, its towers lost in swirling mist. Many villagers whispered that it was a place of shadows, where memories of the past lingered like ghosts. Yet to the Duke, it was home. A home he had inherited after the sudden death of his uncle, the last of his family line. The halls were cold, the tapestries faded, and the silence heavy, but it was his. The Duke, a tall, broad-shouldered man with sharp eyes that missed nothing, walked the corridors alone. His boots echoed against the stone floor. He had always been a man of few words, known for his calm, measured actions, but also for his iron will. Many feared him, some respected him, and few dared cross him. Yet tonight, as the wind howled outside and rain streaked the narrow windows, even he felt a chill of unease. Something in the air was different, something hidden. He carried a candle in one hand and ran his other hand along the cold stone walls. His gaze paused at a door he had never noticed before. It was small, plain, and nearly hidden behind an old tapestry. The metal hinges were rusted, the wood swollen with age. Something about it tugged at him, a quiet insistence he could not ignore. With a firm push, he opened it. A narrow staircase spiraled downward into darkness. The smell hit him first, damp stone, mold, and something far older, almost metallic. He hesitated for a moment, then descended, the candle flickering against the walls. At the bottom he found a heavy wooden door, reinforced with iron bands. It groaned as he pushed it open, revealing a small basement chamber. The room was dim, the shadows deep, and in the far corner his candlelight revealed a figure. A young woman sat on the floor, chained to the wall. Her hair, dark and tangled, fell over her shoulders like a curtain. Her eyes, though wary and tired, were striking, bright, sharp, and full of fire that seemed too strong for someone in such a condition. She was thin, almost fragile-looking, yet her posture carried a quiet pride, as if she refused to be broken despite her chains. The Duke took a step forward. "Who are you?" His voice was low, calm, but carried an authority that made the woman flinch slightly. "I am Ilara," she said, her voice soft yet steady. "Why are you here? Are you another jailer?" Her gaze flicked to his hand holding the candle. "I am not your jailer," the Duke replied. "I am your liberator." He knelt slowly before her, careful not to startle her. "Tell me, who did this to you? Why were you chained here?" Ilara's lips pressed into a thin line. She hesitated, torn between relief and mistrust. I cannot speak it aloud," she whispered. "It is too dangerous." The Duke's eyes narrowed, but he did not force her. Instead, he studied the chains. They were old, rusted, but still strong. He knelt and tested them, then bent to lift the lock. With a careful click, the chains fell away. She rubbed her wrists, the skin marked and raw. "Why would you help me?" she asked, suspicion still clear in her voice. "Because you should not be here," he said simply. "No one deserves this." Ilara looked at him, confusion flickering across her face. Few had ever spoken to her like this. Most had treated her like a prisoner, a thing to be controlled or feared. But the Duke's gaze was steady, unwavering. There was no cruelty in it, only recognition. "Why me?" she asked. Her voice was quieter now, trembling with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "You are strong," he said. "Stronger than anyone gives you credit for." Ilara's eyes searched his, trying to understand his words. She wanted to believe him, yet fear held her back. "And if I cannot trust you?" she asked. "Then I will earn it," the Duke replied. "But for now, come with me. The castle is yours as much as it is mine. You will be safe here." Slowly she rose to her feet. Her movements were cautious, almost wary, but there was a spark in her eyes, a fire that the darkness had never extinguished. The Duke extended a hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. Their fingers brushed, and in that fleeting contact, something unspoken passed between them, a quiet acknowledgement that neither was truly alone anymore. He led her through the castle halls, the candlelight flickering against the stone. She shivered, not from cold, but from the strange, overwhelming sensation of freedom. She had been locked away for as long as she could remember, yet now, everything was open. Everything was uncertain. "You will need a name," the Duke said suddenly, breaking the silence. "A title. A place in this castle, in this world." Elara looked at him, puzzled. "A title?" "Yes," he replied. "You are no longer a prisoner. You are under my protection. And as my guest, as my companion, you will be my Duchess." Ilara's eyes widened. The word was heavy with meaning. She had known little kindness, little respect. To be named Duchess by a man like him, someone so powerful, so certain, so commanding, was bewildering. Yet something inside her stirred, something fragile and longing. I cannot," she whispered, shaking her head. "Try," he said softly. "At least try." She nodded slowly, not fully understanding, but willing to step into this new role, however tentative. They reached a chamber that would become hers, a small, warm room with a fireplace, tapestries, and a bed. It was not luxurious, but it was a sanctuary. As she sat by the fire, the Duke stood nearby, silent, watching over her. He did not speak again, but his presence was enough. The silence was not heavy. It was protective. It allowed her to breathe, to think, to feel again after so long in darkness. Days passed, each one a cautious dance of trust and observation. The Duke and Elara learned to coexist in quiet companionship. She would move through the halls, practicing her steps as a duchess, learning the names of servants and courtiers who now looked to her with curiosity. He would watch her from a distance, protective, yet careful not to overwhelm. Ilara's body healed faster than expected, but her heart carried invisible scars. She flinched at sudden movements, recoiled from loud voices, and sometimes woke in the middle of the night, haunted by memories she could not name. The Duke understood this. He did not ask her to speak of it, nor did he demand she forget. Instead, he offered his presence, steady and unyielding. One evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the castle, Elara stood at the balcony, looking out over the mist-shrouded forest. The wind tangled her hair and she shivered, though the evening was warm. "You are not alone," the Duke said behind her, his voice low, almost a whisper. She did not turn to him, but she felt the weight of his words sink deep into her chest. "I am afraid," she admitted finally, her voice barely audible over the wind. "You should be," he said honestly. "The world is dangerous, but you are stronger than your fear, stronger than those who tried to chain you, and stronger than I ever expected to find." Her breath caught. It was one thing to hear words of comfort from someone indifferent, or even cruel, but to hear them from him, from the Duke, it was different. It felt like the first ember of hope she had felt in a lifetime. A sudden noise behind them made both of them tense. A shadow flitted across the courtyard below. Elara froze. The chains may have been gone, but danger was never far away. The Duke moved closer, placing a protective hand lightly on her shoulder. "We will face it together," he said, "whatever comes." Elara looked up at him, her heart pounding. She wanted to believe him, to trust him fully, but part of her whispered that danger had only begun. The chains in the basement had been replaced by invisible ones of fear, secrecy, and obligation. Could she ever be free? Could she ever trust again? The Duke's eyes met hers, steady and unwavering. In that moment, the unspoken promise hung between them. He would not let her fall, and she would not walk away. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying the scent of storm and change. The castle shivered in the growing darkness, as if it too understood that the lives within its walls were about to shift forever. Ilara inhaled, letting the night fill her lungs. She did not know what awaited her, but for the first time in years, she felt alive. She was no longer a prisoner of stone and shadow. She was a duchess, a woman reborn in the hands of a man she could barely trust, yet could not resist. And somewhere deep in the castle, hidden in the shadows, something watched them. A presence older than the stones, older than the castle itself. Something that had waited centuries for this moment. The chains were gone, but not all bonds could be broken by iron and fire. Some waited in silence, for the heart to be tested. Ilara shivered, not from cold, but from the sense that her freedom was only the beginning, and the Duke, standing beside her, felt the first stirrings of a battle he had not expected, not against armies, not against rivals, but against the dark threads of fate that now entwined them both. The candle in the hall flickered, casting long shadows across the walls. The castle had secrets, and one of them had just awakened. And so, in the quiet of the night, two souls, scarred, cautious, yet unbroken, stood together, bound not by chains, but by the fragile beginnings of trust and desire. Their story was only beginning, and the shadows that surrounded them were waiting, patient, inevitable, and hungry. The castle had never been quieter. Its stone halls echoed only with the wind and the occasional drip of water from the roof. Yet within its walls, life had begun to stir in new ways. Ilara, the Duchess, moved through the corridors with cautious grace. Each step was measured, each glance alert. The castle no longer felt like a prison to her, yet it was not home either. There were shadows everywhere, not only in the corners but also in the hearts of those who walked its halls. The Duke walked beside her, a silent sentinel. He was always calm, always composed, but his eyes missed nothing. Servants, guards, and courtiers all watched the pair with curiosity and speculation. Few had ever seen the Duke so openly connected to anyone, and fewer still had seen him move with such tenderness, however subtle, toward another human being. "You must learn their names," the Duke said one evening as they passed through the great hall, its ceiling high and dark, the air filled with the scent of burning wood. "These are the people who serve the castle. If you hope to rule here, you must know them. They will notice everything you do, every hesitation, every glance." Ilara nodded, her mind racing. She had never lived among nobles. She had never needed to perform politeness or conceal her feelings. Everything here was new, the silks, the whispers, the cautious smiles. She felt like a child learning to walk on polished floors. "I am afraid," she admitted quietly, almost ashamed. "Afraid that I will fail them, or fail you." The Duke glanced at her, his face calm but his eyes intense. "Fear is natural," he said, "but fear alone does not control you. You must decide what controls you, the fear or your courage." Ilara looked down at her hands. Courage felt like a fragile thing. She had never known it so clearly. She had survived chains and darkness, yet standing here in the castle, she felt exposed in a new way. She did not know if she could be what the Duke expected her to be. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, she learned the rhythm of the castle. She learned the servants' names, remembered the faces of the courtiers, and practiced her role as Duchess. But every evening she returned to her chambers, and every evening the Duke was there, silent, watching over her. It was during one of these evenings that she first noticed the subtle changes in him. The Duke's armor of control had small cracks. In private moments, his expression softened. When she spoke, he listened, not as a ruler to a subject, but as a man to a woman. Yet there was still distance between them, a tension that neither dared to break. One stormy night, the wind rattled the windows, and lightning illuminated the castle in brief flashes. Ilara could not sleep. She walked through the corridors, her gown brushing the stone floor, her thoughts heavy with doubt. She stopped at the library, a vast room filled with dust and books whose pages smelled of age and mystery. The Duke was there, seated by the fire, a book in his hands, but his eyes were on her, waiting. "You should not wander alone," he said quietly, his voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate with the thunder outside. "I cannot sleep," she admitted. "The storm, it makes the past feel close again." He closed the book slowly, setting it aside. "The past is never far," he said, "but you are no longer chained. You are no longer helpless. That matters more than what has been done to you." Ilara looked at him, searching for the meaning in his words. "Do you trust me?" she asked, almost without realizing it. The Duke paused. "I trust you to be yourself," he said finally. "I do not expect perfection. I only expect honesty." The simplicity of his answer struck her. She had spent her life surrounded by lies, by people who demanded obedience and silence. To hear someone say they wanted only her truth, it was almost unbearable. She wanted to believe him, yet fear whispered that trust could be broken in an instant. Days passed, and the castle stirred with new rumors. Courtiers whispered about the mysterious Duchess and her unusual rise. They noticed how the Duke's expression softened in her presence, how his guard relaxed in ways it had never before. Some admired her, others envied her, and one among them, a visiting emissary from a rival house, watched them with an expression that did not hide suspicion. Ilara noticed the man at the next feast. His eyes lingered too long on her, and though he bowed and spoke with politeness, there was a cold calculation behind his smile. The Duke noticed too, and for the first time, a shadow crossed his face. "Do you know him?" Ilara asked quietly after the guests had gone. "I do not trust him," the Duke replied. "And you must be cautious as well. Some people seek to use others as tools, or worse, weapons." Ilara nodded, understanding more than she wanted. The world outside the basement was dangerous in ways she had never imagined. Chains were not only metal and locks, they were words, expectations, and manipulation, and she was still learning how to navigate them. One afternoon, as she practiced walking through the great hall in her new gown, she found herself near the Duke's private study. The door was ajar, and she glimpsed a book on the desk, a ledger filled with notes about the castle, the lands, and its history. One page in particular caught her eye. It spoke of a curse that had lingered over the Duke's family for generations, a darkness that had claimed lives and twisted fates. Her breath caught. Could this curse have something to do with her imprisonment? Could the chains in the basement have been part of a far larger plot? The Duke entered quietly, sensing her concern. "You found the ledger," he said, his voice calm. "It tells much of my family's history. Some of it dark, some tragic. It is not for gossip, but for knowledge. Knowledge is power, Ilara. Power can save or destroy." I think I understand," she said slowly. "The curse. Could it be why I was imprisoned?" He studied her for a moment, his gaze unreadable. "Perhaps," he said. "Or perhaps it is something older than both of us. But you must not dwell only on the past. You have a role now, one that is yours to define." Their conversations grew more frequent. The Duke shared stories of the castle, of the lands, of battles fought long before her birth. And in return, she shared small truths of her life, her fears, her fleeting hopes. Each word built a fragile bridge of trust between them. One evening, as the storm outside had passed and the moon rose pale over the hills, Ilara found herself in the courtyard. The night was quiet, almost serene. The Duke joined her, walking silently by her side. "You have changed," he said after a long pause. "You are no longer the girl I found in the basement. You are strong, thoughtful, and resilient." Ilara felt warmth rise in her chest. "I could not have come this far without you," she said softly. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached for her hand, gently taking it in his own. The contact was brief, but it carried a weight neither had expected. The fire of fear, sorrow, and mistrust that had burned in her chest began to shift, replaced by a quiet recognition that connection was possible. But the night was not entirely still. From the shadows at the edge of the courtyard, a figure watched. Cloaked, silent, and patient, the emissary observed their interaction, noting the bond forming between Duke and Duchess. Whatever his intentions, he understood that this union was dangerous to his plans. Ilara did not notice him. She only felt the warmth of the Duke's hand and the calm of his presence. And yet, deep inside, a whisper of unease reminded her that safety was never guaranteed, that shadows lingered even in light. The following morning, the Duke received a letter. The seal bore the mark of a rival noble house, a sign of challenge, of intrigue. He read it carefully, the color draining slightly from his face. "It seems," he said quietly to Ilara, "that our peace is temporary." She looked at him, her heart pounding. "Do you mean danger?" "Yes," he replied. "But not all danger is physical. Some danger comes from those who wish to control, to manipulate, or to destroy what they cannot understand." Ilara swallowed hard, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. Chains may have been gone from her wrists, but the world was filled with other, subtler chains, chains of expectation, of power, of threat, and she was learning, slowly, how to navigate them. That night, as she lay in her chamber, she could not sleep. Her thoughts wandered to the basement, to the chains that had marked her for so long, and to the Duke who had freed her, yet had asked nothing in return. She realized that freedom was not merely the absence of chains. It was trust, courage, and the willingness to face the unknown. And above all, it was a choice she would have to make again and again, because the shadows in the castle were growing longer. The whispers in the halls were no longer just rumors, they were warnings. And the world outside the Duke's walls was waiting, patient, ready to test the bond forming between the woman once chained and the man who had named her his Duchess. In the quiet of the night, she understood something for the first time. Being a Duchess was not about titles or respect. It was about power, yes, but also about courage, loyalty, and the strength to rise even when fear threatened to pull her down. She closed her eyes, and in that moment, she made a silent promise. She would not falter. Not now, not ever. And somewhere in the shadows, the emissary smiled, knowing that the first move in a dangerous game had already been made. The Duke and Ilara were no longer prisoners of chains, but their freedom would be tested in ways neither could yet imagine. And so, the story continued. Two souls bound by trust, desire, and the slow-burning fire of connection, moving forward into a world of intrigue, whispers, and challenges that would shape them both. The castle's walls seemed heavier that morning, as if they too were aware of the storm approaching. Outside, clouds gathered, dark and restless, blotting out the sun. Within the halls, a tense silence had settled. Whispers of intrigue had reached the Duke's ears, and he knew that the peace Ilara and he had found was fragile. Ilara moved through her chambers, adjusting the folds of her gown, her thoughts restless. Her nights had been filled with visions of chains, shadows, and the basement that had once imprisoned her. She had long since learned that freedom was not simply the absence of iron and locks. It was the strength to face danger and the courage to trust, even when fear threatened to consume her. The Duke entered her room quietly, his presence commanding yet gentle. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice calm, steady, but tinged with the weight of responsibility. Ilara looked up at him. "I do not know what to expect," she admitted, "but I am ready to face it. With you." He offered a small nod. "Then we shall face it together." They walked through the castle in silence. The corridors darkened by the storm. Servants hurried past, glancing nervously at the pair, sensing that the calm that had once existed here was about to shatter. At the great hall, the Duke confronted the emissary who had been watching them since her arrival. The man bowed, polite on the surface, but the cold calculation behind his eyes was unmistakable. "You have come far," the Duke said, his gaze sharp. "But you do not belong here. Leave before you force my hand." The emissary's smile was thin and unreadable. "I do not come as an enemy, yet. But truths must be revealed, or the consequences will be severe." Ilara stepped forward, feeling the tension coil in her chest. The past weeks had taught her to trust the Duke, but they had also reminded her that danger could appear in many forms, some subtle, some direct. She clenched her hands, her resolve firm. "You speak of consequences," she said, her voice steady, "but you know nothing of my strength. I am no longer the girl you thought could be silenced." The emissary's eyes widened slightly. The fire in her gaze reminded him of the basement chains, the girl who had once seemed so fragile, now standing unbroken. "You are bold," he said softly. "But the Duke's family, the curse, it touches everything, even you." Ilara's eyes narrowed. "Then we will face it. Together." The Duke placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "You are not alone," he said. "Remember that. Not now, not ever." The emissary's expression hardened. "Very well," he said, bowing slightly. "The storm is coming. Prepare yourselves." And with that he departed, leaving behind an unsettling silence. For a moment, the weight of what had just occurred pressed on them both. But then, the first tendrils of understanding appeared. Danger was real, but so was their bond. The chains of the past had been broken, and though new trials awaited, they would face them together. The storm arrived by nightfall. Lightning illuminated the castle walls, thunder echoing like the beat of war drums. Somewhere beyond the mountains, the curse that had haunted the Duke's family stirred, as if sensing the awakening of Ilara's own latent strength. Ilara and the Duke stood in the tallest tower, looking out at the wild expanse. "I can feel it," she whispered. "Something is coming." He did not answer immediately. Instead, he watched the horizon, his jaw tight, his eyes narrowed. "Yes," he said finally, "but we are not powerless. Whatever it is, we will face it, and we will endure." The hours passed in tense preparation. The Duke called his guards, ensured that the castle's defenses were ready, and studied the ancient texts that spoke of the curse. Ilara, meanwhile, discovered a power within herself she had never known. It was subtle at first, a warmth in her hands, a sense of command over the energy around her. She practiced quietly, focusing on control and precision, knowing that this strength could be the key to confronting the darkness. When midnight came, the storm reached its peak. Winds tore across the castle, rattling windows and doors. Shadows moved unnaturally along the stone walls. And from the depths of the forest, a presence approached, dark and relentless, seeking to challenge what had been built between them. The Duke and Ilara stood side by side in the great hall, the candlelight flickering across their determined faces. The emissary returned, not alone this time, but accompanied by creatures cloaked in shadow, their forms shifting and indistinct. You should not have returned, the Duke said, his voice firm, but his hand rested lightly on the hilt of his sword. The emissary smiled thinly. Neither of us will walk away untouched. Only one will claim victory. Elara stepped forward, her heart pounding, yet her posture unwavering. She felt the warmth in her hands flare, a light that was small but steady. She could sense the creatures hesitate, as if recognizing the strength within her. Together, she said, her voice rising above the storm. We face this together? The Duke nodded. Yes, together. The battle was fierce, though not in the way Elara had imagined. Shadows twisted and lunged, but she realized quickly that brute force alone would not succeed. She needed to control her power, to direct it, to combine it with the Duke's strategy. He moved with precision, guarding her while simultaneously challenging the emissary and the shadowed creatures. Each step, each strike, was a dance of protection and trust. And with every action, Elara felt herself growing stronger, her fear replaced by determination. Finally, in the heart of the storm, Elara focused fully. Her hands glowed faintly with energy, not blinding but steady, warm and commanding. She stepped forward, speaking words she did not know she remembered from the texts, words that held the weight of generations. The shadows shrieked and recoiled. The curse, ancient and dark, struggled against the force of her will, against the bond between her and the Duke. But together, their unity proved stronger than the darkness. The shadows dissolved, the storm seemed to waver, and the emissary fell back, astonished by the power of what he had underestimated. Elara and the Duke stood together, chest heaving, the candlelight flickering across sweat-dampened faces. For the first time, they felt the weight of the curse lift, not entirely gone, but weakened, broken enough that it could no longer harm them directly. You did it, the Duke said softly, his hand brushing hers, not as a command but as recognition. We did it, she corrected, feeling the surge of accomplishment and relief. Together. They turned to the horizon, where the storm had begun to fade, and for the first time they saw the moonlight spill over the mountains. The castle was quiet, the danger past, for now. And in that quiet, they understood something essential. Their bond was forged not by necessity or power alone, but by trust, courage, and mutual recognition of each other's strength. The Duke stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. You are no longer the girl chained in a basement, he said quietly. You are my Duchess, yes, but more than that. You are my equal, my partner. Elara felt her chest tighten with emotion. She had feared trust, feared vulnerability, feared the possibility of loss. But now, standing here, she realized that love was not weakness, it was strength. And with the Duke, she could face anything. I trust you, she said, her voice trembling slightly, but firm. And I choose to stand with you, always. He lowered his gaze, and in that moment, the distance between them disappeared. Their hands met, fingers entwining. Not as protector and ward, but as equals, as partners, as something deeper than either had dared to imagine. Outside, the first rays of dawn broke through the clouds. The castle, scarred and ancient, seemed to breathe again. The storm had passed, the shadows dispersed, and the world beyond awaited. But for now, in this castle, in this moment, there was peace. Elara looked at the Duke, her heart swelling with a mixture of relief, pride, and longing. The chains are gone, she whispered. Yes, he replied. But remember, freedom is not the end, it is the beginning. And in that beginning, they found not only love but redemption. The shadows of the past had tested them. The chains of fear had tried to bind them, but they had emerged stronger, bound not by iron, but by trust, courage, and the quiet, unbreakable flame of connection. The Duke and Duchess stood side by side, the castle around them bathed in the soft light of dawn. They had survived the darkness, faced the curse, and discovered that their strength was not in solitude, but in each other. And though challenges would come again, though whispers and shadows would never fully disappear, they knew one unshakable truth. Together, they could endure anything. Their story, once defined by chains and shadows, was now written in courage, love, and the quiet triumph of two souls who had found each other in the darkness and refused to let go.